We've been talking about how scientists believed for a long time that the brain was static, fixed in place, and permanent once we became adults. In a remarkable way, this has all changed in recent years, at least among researchers. Over the last 2 decades, neuroscientists have discovered the surprising degree to which the mature adult brain continues to rewire and change over time, a process called neuroplasticity.
We know that the brain is able to grow new neurons, a process called neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons. We know that this happens in kids, but what happened about 15 years ago or so is that we came to understand that new neurons can be born in adults, that neurogenesis is possible throughout our lives. And that was a very, very exciting possibility. And knowing that is a game changer because it says, okay, if new neurons can grow, maybe we can figure out how to make more of them grow. Neuroplasticity is let's just break it down into its parts, neuro and plasticity. So plasticity is a term we could use for many different systems. Systems that are changing over time or that are able to be changed over time are plastic systems, right? You can really think of it as like something you might store your macaroni in, right? It's just, you can move it around. It's able to be morphed in different ways. Neuroplasticity is just saying the brain has a very similar capacity. And the concept of neuroplasticity is just that if you make the brain behave in a certain way for a long enough period of time, it's going to have its structure reflect that type of process.
Physical changes occur in the brain according to what happens in the environment. The mind isn't static. The mind is constantly changing and responding to environment, input from the outside, inside. It's a dynamic, complex structure that processes information from the bottom up and then top down and interacts and changes with everything.
So of course we are constantly impacted by experience within the body and outside the body. From, radiation to chemicals, to food, to poisons. Yeah, the brain. And it probably changes all the time. It probably moves and shakes every second in some very subtle way, of course. But even in some gross ways, it's constantly reacting and adapting to the demands that it had to what comes in, to the evidence of the senses. It's first and foremost vulnerable to what we hear and what we see. So the first thing we're vulnerable to is what we're told and what we believe because of what we're told, of what we understand. So that's plasticity right there.
The earliest hints of brain changeability came as early as the experiments of Italian anatomist Michele Vincenzo Malacarne in 1793, with a formal proposal of the theory made in 1890 by William James in The Principles of Psychology. Monkey experiments by Carl Lashley in 1923 also demonstrated changes in neuronal pathways. The idea that human brains could change, however, still remained largely ignored. Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb in 1949 once again hypothesized that learning was based on the strengthening of synapses that occurs when 2 neurons are simultaneously active, In other words, cells that fire together wire together. Up more in the 1960s, with key studies of Paul Bach-Irita, Michael Merzenich, John Koss, and others. Beginning in the 1970s, the neuroscience community began to admit the evidence no longer supported the view that the brain and nervous system were fixed throughout adulthood.
Do you have the same brain now that you were born with? Of course not. You know, your brain has changed, has evolved, right? Well, hopefully evolved. Sometimes you wonder when you walk around looking at humanity.
There's hard scientific data, fMRI data, which means we're scanning the brain and looking at what's happening in the brain as it's happening, that demonstrates that adults' brains can change depending on how we live our lives, what types of habits we practice, where we put our attention.
I was saying earlier about neuroplasticity is if you do a particular activity for some period of time, over and over again, the parts of the brain that are needed for that activity are going to get stronger, okay, are going to get healthier. In the same way that if I were a bodybuilder, right, I'm gonna work out my upper body's gonna be much stronger, but my legs might not change at all. So it's the activity that we engage in that changes those targeted areas. Same thing for the brain.
Our brains are not as fixed as we used to believe, and that there is some flexibility and some ability to cultivate new pathways, to come out of well-worn grooves over time if we continue to practice. The brain is like a muscle too. We can exercise it in these various ways.
This is actually a revolutionary idea even within neuroscience. I would say when I was in graduate school, it was not a very popular idea. It wasn't something that everybody just knew. The idea that you were born with a certain brain structure and you're pretty much stuck with it after it's fully developed was probably the norm in our thinking. But it ends up that that is wrong, and that there are new brain cells being born, new connections being made in different brain cells all the time on a daily basis.
Brain changes happen with good experiences and bad. Something like abuse, for instance, has been shown to impact the brain. Scientists have now discovered these same kinds of changeable brain networks playing a role in clinical depression, general fear and anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, attention problems, and delusional schizophrenic challenges. One research team in the Harvard Review of Psychiatry suggested that the neural network model for behavior has produced a paradigm shift for modern psychiatry. The consequences of this paradigm shift are only now being explored in medicine, psychology, and other fields. While the ultimate potential of the brain and the limits of its changeability remain an exciting mystery, one thing is clear. What we used to believe about the brain isn't what we believe now. I think that of all the things we could do to help people in this arena, people who have mental health challenges, we've got to come up with a better set of metaphors. My life experience has shown me that my brain is not like a car engine that needs oil. My life experience has shown me that my brain is like a brain, and we don't know exactly what that is. And so we should be sparing with our metaphors about it. And when we use metaphors, we should know that we're using a metaphor. Because years later, having seen that season come and go in my life, and having had opportunities in life open up to me, having met people and formed relationships and done work and traveled and fallen in and out of love and raised a beautiful house full of plants, all these things that I could have never imagined would come my way, that had nothing to do with my brain being like a motor without oil in it. I think we would do well to just submit on some level to the mystery of the brain and to acknowledge that there are a lot of things we don't understand about it, and therefore what's possible we literally can't even imagine. We've been talking to this point about neuroplasticity and the new way of thinking about the brain it represents. In the next class discussion, we'll ask the same question we did earlier. What does this other understanding of the brain mean for individuals and families facing serious mental and emotional problems?